Hi everybody. I'd like to just talk to you about a few aspects on koi fish and what I've learned personally. And if you have a look at, for those of you that are starting this beautiful hobby, have you ever gone to the Drakensberg or in the Cape and you've been standing in a river and you've looked at the plants that are on the side of the river, and you looked at the pebbles, and you've looked at the oxygen that's flowing, that's in the pond, or in the river, at least in the water, and the freshness of the water. Well, that's the kind of thing that you're trying to simulate when it comes to a koi pond, no matter what size. So it's rather difficult, because what you want to do is you want to consider plant filtration, but at the same time you want to consider how do you keep the water moving like that river that's flowing, that ease of flow that's creating oxygenation, and that's also bringing the fresh nutrients through. So one needs to be very careful about also planning for a koi pond, so that you can understand, but have that in mind of that river concept that I've just spoken about. Okay, so let's just work on water quality and just have a look at one or two elements in terms of what I have found. If you have a look at the nitrogen cycle, the first thing that happens is that, of course, fish food, and then, of course, the water then would take a bit of a change because of the fish food in and fish food out, if you like. Now, there is a table that also allows you to understand the differences of what levels of ammonia you can have in the pond that's allowable, that the fish are still doing well and the immune systems are not compromised. So there's a table that shows the pH and that shows the temperature. And once you have the pH and the temperature and you correlate those two, there's a table that shows you what allowable ammonia you can have in your pond. So that's just a guideline if you don't have the necessary equipment. And let's face it, the equipment can be many thousands. And so sometimes it's not that necessary for you to go to that expense, as long as you can just follow a couple of principles. The Japanese also have a saying, learn how to keep water, then you have fish. And so it is true. So let's go back to the river situation of understanding the freshness of the water. Then the other thing is that nitrite. Now, from ammonia, you then have nitrite, NO2. And what happens with nitrite? Nitrite, we've found that 90%, in fact, I'd go as far as to saying 95% of all problems that you have with your fish begins with nitrite, because that is a gas. So that already compromises the fish. So have a look at your nitrite. Now, what level should you have of nitrite? Well, as little as possible. Because it's toxic, you want to have that as little as possible. That's very important. Then, moving over to NO3, which is nitrate, or as I commonly call it, liquid compost. That is where you will find, you'll have algae blooms, for instance, if you have too much nitrate. If you have nitrate reaching to 80 parts per million, and then also up to 100, 120 parts per million, you'll find that the fish on their skins are starting to blister because of the burn of the nitrate. So that's very important, that you don't have too high nitrate. So you need to keep a balance. As far as that is concerned, you also need to have a look and see what is the correlation between your ammonia, your nitrite, and your nitrate. And if there's an imbalance, you need to also see what is acute and what is chronic. It's very important to find the root of the problem. So then, if we move on, any changes on pH, sudden changes, shocks the fish tremendously. So be very careful as far as that is concerned. Temperature also. But if we have a look at the various treatments, the elements of the water that you need to consider, which is very important to understand. The first is pH, ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, and then, of course, your calcium hardness, and phosphate, and your water hardness. Is the water soft or is the water hard? And that is also another fascinating part about koi keeping. Certain of the colors do well with soft water. Certain of the colors do better with hard water. So what am I basically saying is that when you have water that is rich in hydrogen, it will become acid. So what will happen is that it is soft water. But in dry areas where you have good mineral and that you don't have too much of a washout, if I can term it that, with your water, in other words, taking out your minerals. If you've got high minerals that is in the water, that is then hard water, and your pH is more alkaline. So as you can understand and see, that the more alkaline your water is, the better for your fish, and the less bacteria that you have. The more acidic you move, you can have acidosis, and you'll have bacteria and all of that basically thrives off an acidic water base. So you don't want to go there as far as, moving towards a more acidic koi pond, because that also tells you that you don't have enough minerals in the water. So you need to make sure. Now, why is the water then mineral free? Well, because of your filtration and your backwashes all the time, and a lot of times people using municipal water. So the municipal water is not as rich as, like, for instance, a boil water. So now, if I just have municipal water, well, what do I do now? There's certain chemicals that you put in. Minerals is the better word. And one of them is bentonite clay or molten murielite, and that is a product such as bio-earth that you add into the water so that you can create more minerals. In other words, keeping the water alkaline. That's one telltale sign that you must look out for. Very, very important. Of course, if you have too much of an alkaline pond, then you move into alkalosis, which is just as bad as acidosis. So just to consider those factors. And then, of course, the other thing is that koi nutrition. If we have a look at koi nutrition, yes, you do get the pellets. And the important thing is, whilst we're talking about the pellets, is, I commonly say that if you live off takeaways, you're not going to be that healthy. You need vegetables, you need nutrients to build up your immune system. Now, the same thing is with the koi fish. So what you want to do is, don't compromise on the koi food. You need to, if you get a proper, high-based, good quality koi food, you're actually going to find that you're feeding less because they are getting the necessary nutrients right from start. Otherwise, you're going to find that you're going to be overfeeding, and that also is compromising the water quality. So can you see what I'm saying? It's best to invest and do your homework properly so that you have a good balanced nutrition for your pets. The other thing is that when it comes to koi nutrition, is especially in summer, you can have certain treats that can build their immune system. Sometimes what you could do is you could take brown bread, not white bread, brown bread or seed bread, and you put a little bit of honey on, and you can feed that to the fish, and they do well with that. The other is your brown bread or seed bread with peanut butter, and they enjoy that as well. You're also getting the good vitamins. Honey, of course, you're getting the probiotic. What you could do if you don't want to do that is if you can take honey, I'm not talking about syrup, I'm talking about pure honey, and you can take a tablespoon of that in warm water and you can stir it up, and then what you do is you take your fish food, your pellets, and you leave it in the water so that it can then, after about 20 minutes or 15 minutes, it'll absorb, because of the dry pellets, it'll absorb all that nutrients, and you can feed that to the fish. So there's ways that you could do that. Others would use watermelon, and remember, we're not talking about a lot, we're talking about treats here. You can also use nachis or oranges, and again, as I said, sparingly, but to get the vitamins for the fish. So those are ideas that you really can do. The others is a lettuce a whole lettuce, and you just leave the lettuce in the water, and as it is getting soft on the edges, they're eating away at it, sucking away at it, and eventually you're going to just throw away the core. But continually work on building their immune system, but keeping the water healthy. The water must be healthy, it must be moving. Remember the river situation, the same thing. It must be moving water all over. Nice oxygen, lots of oxygen will keep your fish healthy. Then, of course, what you want to do is, when you're spotting a fish that is not doing too well, the important thing is that you act quickly. Don't leave it too long, because it may be a problem. If it's parasitic or bacterial or fungal, it's going to affect the other fish. When we do a microscope analysis, and it's very important, because otherwise it's just a thumbsuck of, well, the fish are not looking well, so we'll just throw medicine in. Please don't do that. What you need to do is, remember, we need to find out what the root of the problem is. So we do a microscope scrape, and we see what's on one fish will be on the other fish. Now, just an idea. When I'm doing a microscope, ready to do microscope analysis on fish to determine what's going on, first of all, I've seen the behavior of the fish. The fish are flicking or flashing, just not happy. Then what I do is I look at the fish that is compromised the most. That tells me normally that that's the carrier of either the parasite, the bacterial, or fungal. And 99% of the times I've found that to be correct. Remember, you don't just do one scrape, you do 2 scrapes and sometimes 3 if you need to, just to make absolutely sure. Once you know what parasite it is, that's when you go over to what medication am I going to use. Now, do you have salt in the water? Then you must use a certain type of medication. Some medications are highly toxic if you mix it up with salt, and also highly toxic if your pH isn't right. If your pH is too acidic, you see, we go again to the acidic side. So having acidic water is not a good thing. You want to bring it back to in your 7, between your 7 and your 8, and you want to bring it a more alkaline. So that in terms of your koi fish, the important thing is that act quickly. That's all I want to say on that subject. And then, of course, the other thing is quarantine. It is critical that you quarantine. Now, I do understand that not everybody's got a backup pond like this to quarantine the fish 4 to 6 weeks before introducing into the main pond. So really, what do you do in that instance? You naturally have selected the koi fish at a dealer, and you have seen that it is healthy, and now what you do is you want to introduce it into the pond. So you can either do a dip, either a salt dip, or you can do a medication dip. The important thing there is that you now are helping the fish settle down, and what you want to do from there is, once you introduce it into the pond, just remember, the pond now is used to, let's call it, it's used to its own environment. The water is used to the amount of fish, and the water is used to, and the fish are used to having their ecosystem well balanced. Now you bring a new fish in, it's come from a different environment altogether, a different ecosystem altogether. That will shock the water, and it will also shock the fish. I've had many a discussion where large fish are dying in the pond, but I've only bought a little fish and I've introduced. Remember, it's like a boy in a bubble. If somebody comes near that boy in a bubble and has a slight cough, that boy in the bubble is going to definitely get that. It's the same concept. The example I'm using, it's the same concept of what we're dealing with. So understand that your pond is in a protective environment and being protected. It's not used to having all sorts of fish coming in and out. The important thing is water is so sensitive to change. So you don't want to bring in a fish that you've bought and just plonk it into the water, and also then with the current water that there is that's been in the bag, and just throw it all in, because you're going to look for trouble. Sometimes you may be lucky, but we don't work on luck in this game. We work on excellence, and that's what I want to just convey to you. So what you want to do is, when you're introducing, first of all, temperature of the water in your current pond, temperature of the water in the bag that the fish was transported in, and slowly you want to marry the two so that the fish is not stressed. If the fish is stressed at any given moment, you may not see it now, but you're going to see it weeks later and sometimes months later, depending on the season. So that is very, very important. What you want to do is you want to take the fish in a small pond or a small dish, and you want to introduce of your existing water in there. Slowly introduce, let the fish get used to the water. Then you net the fish, and you then introduce it into your pond. You leave that water and you throw that water out. Don't mix the two. So that's basically what I wanted to talk on that. The other thing is overstocking. So many people say, well, how many fish should I have? Well, rule of thumb, if you have a look at each fish, and about, if I look from fingertip to elbow, about 50-55 centimeters, whatever fish you have currently in your pond, if you can picture them all at that size, are you overstocked or aren't you? You'll very quickly see. Now, in terms of overstocking, when you get to a fish of about 55 centimeters, you want to at least give that fish 1,000 liters of water. Now, it's not always possible, so how do you go about it? You can either have high stocking density, but then you must go bigger filtration. You must double or triple your current filtration. If you want to stick to the same filtration, you want to keep your stocking densities lower, hence keeping the fish healthy. Can you see the balance I'm talking about? So that's very important. Then, of course, on filtration, as I said, filtration, don't compromise on your filtration, very important. And then the other thing, and lastly, is your backup plan. Make sure that you have a backup plan. Should there be a power out, that you have oxygen for your fish. And if you have, excuse me, if you have fish that are sick, have you got a medication area where you can also help the fish as well? So have a backup plan. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your time.